Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Rudy. I'm the senior instruction writer at Golf Digest, where I've been since 1999. And this is really going to be a fun presentation to be a part of today because uh, there's a lot of great coaches that have interesting areas of expertise. But James Leitz, my friend, his credentials, I think they might be unique in all the world of golf. You're talking about somebody who's not only one of our Golf Digest 50 best teachers, but a Golf Digest top 100 club fitter, a Golf Magazine top 100 teacher, a head professional at a golf club. I think if you look in the on our 50 best list, there's only two of those, and most of the people on that list are very specific directors of instruction or tour coaches. So this is someone who not only understands the way the club moves and what the club is supposed to do as a tool in your hand, but also understands what club life is like. And James has been a featured speaker at MIT and is shared the presentation that you're about to see, or pieces of it, all over the world. So I think this is really going to be an interesting story, and I can't believe he's going to make me say this, but he in fact did do the cover story on our enemy publication at Golf Magazine in 2014, talking about driver. And I hate to say it, but it was a good story, I have to admit. And I hope that he considers us the next time he wants to do something like that. And James is also the inventor of the Leitz Golf Impact Model, which is it's a device that really illustrated the D-plane for the first time, and it's something that I know. I think there's 24 top coaches that use it as an integral part of their coaching. So I'm looking forward to hearing what we're gonna talk about today. And James, why don't you take us through some of the journey where you've been in your career, and tell us a little bit about the place where you're coaching now.
Well, obviously, I'm 61 years old. I picked up a golf club for the first time in 1972 by accident, and I've been in love with this game ever since, and infatuated how it works, getting other people better, and it's brought me to this point. I'm now at Chipunka Country Club in Covington, Louisiana. This is the facility they built me to get me to come here, and it is a beautiful facility. We're outside of New Orleans. We have a learning center putting fitting studio that we use for all of our fitting equipment in our putting studio. This is my super bay that I think has as much technology in this one room that I'm standing in as any in the world. And I'm very proud of that. Spent a lot of money to get that, and I'm not a rich person, but I'm just a person who loves learning myself, and I've never stopped learning and never will, as long as the good Lord gives me a chance to stay in this great game. So it really is a very humbling thing when you're asked to speak to other golf professionals. And I want to thank James Jewell. He's been my Ledbetter coordinator up to this time. Obviously, you, Matt, what you do for golf instruction is paramount as anyone in the world. Getting the word out of what we do and making golfers better and encouraging the growth of the game. I can't tell you how important a job that is. And obviously, Mr. David Ledbetter. I've only met David a couple of times. One was if anybody ever watched the videos that TrackMan did of me when I first introduced the D-plane on their website, we literally did it 5 feet in front of David Ledbetter's door at his academy. And he walked out of his office and during one of the breaks, and he goes, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "Well, that's the D-plane." He goes, "Oh, that's interesting," and he walked away. So we've come a long way from that day. And, I've always admired him through the years, and he definitely was a role model for many of us in the business. But I start all my presentations with this one slide. I call it my journey to 4/10,000ths of a second. 4/10,000ths of a second is how long the ball and the club face are together. It's the only time the golf ball gets instructions. So every piece of technology I use all goes back to delivering the club more efficiently. Delivering it faster and delivering it more efficiently and faster is what we need. So everything goes through that small prism. This is one of my favorite slides. This is of me of 1980. I took this with a still camera. I missed a tournament in college. I played golf at McNeese State University, and I missed the tournament. I was so mad and angry. I had my girlfriend take pictures of me, and this is one of the pictures that came up. And I looked at it a week after I took the picture because it was the old still picture days. You had to get them developed. And you could see the shaft pass my left arm very quickly in the downswing. There was only one problem. I didn't know it was wrong. So I was playing college golf, flipping the golf club. I could hit it over anything. And my teammates, by the way, I had two teammates win PGA Tour finals and on my team. And they go, how do you hit that ball so high? And I thought it was because I was good, and I didn't realize it was because I sucked. So again, hitting 300 balls a day, doing something wrong. And I wanted to play golf for a living, like I think every college golfer really maybe thinks of, but I knew I was not good enough. So literally a month after college, I got a job at Pinewood Country Club in Slidell, Louisiana, 22 years old, head golf professional. I actually never spent a single day as an assistant in my life. And I gave this gentleman who was an aeronautical engineer a lesson, and I told him to do something at the top of his backswing, and he says, why do you want me to do that? And I said, well, because I do that. And he goes, well, okay. And looking back, that was the dumbest thing I could ever say, but I was 22 years old, didn't know any better. And he says, well, how do you know if I do it right? I said, well, I got my eyes. He says, well, James, he says, never guess what you can measure. And I said, why, Mr. Red? He says, because if you measure a poor occurrence and you measure a good occurrence, if you measure both of them, you can reconcile why they're different. So you hear that saying all the time, never guess what you can measure. And I've been speaking it for a long time, but it didn't come from me. It came from Mr. Ray LeCombe. God bless him. He was a big part of my early years. So I went out and bought a $2,800 video camera that very next week. $2,800, only made $9,000 a year. So technology is a very interesting thing. I bought almost everything that's come along in the last 38 years. Some of it's been good, some of it's been bad. I've learned from all of it. But you know, there's a lot of debate about the use of technology, and it is a double-edged sword. I tell my students the technology is for me mostly and not for them. I had a major surgery a year and a half ago, and the gentleman that operated on me told me about 2 sentences of what he was going to do. Very complicated surgery. So I think as teachers, sometimes we've got to be careful that with technology that we use it the right way. So it's the teacher's responsibility to determine who needs technology to be convinced, who needs technology to measure change. When someone comes into this room, I measure them for a good 30 minutes, everything they do on my technologies without saying a word. I want to see what they do naturally before I even chime in on what I want to change. Who needs technology for feedback? You know, sometimes we can give very good feedback with technology, whether it be video, force plates, gears, hack motion, cacto, whatever we use. Then this is the biggie. Who could be confused by technology? It's our responsibility to get our students and read them who is really confused by technology, because if they get confused by it, you better get them the heck away from it. Last, who is addicted to technology? So many people come in and they're looking at the numbers every single time. After they hit a shot, I turn them off from the TrackMan if I feel like that's what's happening, because I don't want that to happen. So here's a picture of my first video camera in 1982, 30 frames a second, 100 shutter speed, $2,800 that thing was. What has my 47-year journey taught me? The difference between laws and preferences. There's only 4 laws in golf. Everything else is a preference. Here's my favorite slide. It's been in every, not the pictures, but it's been in my presentation for 20 years. Great players pay homage to laws they have no idea exist. If you think these 2 guys on the screen know what I'm fixing to talk about, no way. But they don't have to know it because they're not breaking the law. So when does someone need to know these laws? When they're breaking them. If they're not breaking them, they don't need to know anything. So there's only 4 things that tell a ball what to do. It gets all of its instructions in 4/10,000ths of a second. So it's sitting there waiting to see how fast the club is moving, which is the speed of the club. What direction is the force of the club moving in relation to the target and the horizon. So when this golf club's moving, it's moving in one direction and one direction only. But we're measuring it in relation to the horizon, and we're measuring it in relation to the target. It's only one direction of force. So really, angle of attack and path, to me, are the same thing. What direction is the face pointing? I mean, obviously, it could be left of the hole, at the hole, right of the hole. It could be left of the path, in line with the path, or to the right of the path. That's the face. It could be added loft, delivered loft, stated loft, or delofted. That's also face. So face isn't just open or close. It's also adding loft and delofting. Where is the impact point? And this is the biggie that has been very important for me for over 30 years. This club only slows down when you find its center of percussion. When you find that center of mass right behind the ball, it only slows down. But when it hits anywhere off of that, it starts twisting. And when it twists, it has gear effects. It's less with an iron, more with a wood, but it's a very, very important part of golf. So they're the 4 laws. So when a teacher's teaching, everything they do with a student has to go through these 4 laws. So the impact alignment system has 2 components. The speed generation system, which is the efficient acceleration and deceleration of the body segments from proximal to distal end. In 2006, I had the honor of being with a bunch of other golf professionals at TPI. They had 3D back in 2006, and Greg and David showed us how this worked. I was totally unaware of that, how we created speed. Greg Rose says, James, is deceleration good to downswing? And I said, no way. He goes, you're wrong. He showed me graphs. I said, wow, how, this is 2006. I said, how much are one of these systems? He says, they're $40,000. So I went out and bought an AMM system. By the way, that was about $15,000 more than I made a year in teaching at the time. And so I just wanted to learn. I realized that I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was teaching stuff that was wrong. The second is what we just talked about. That's the geometric impact alignment. So that's the other part of impact. So that's speed, path, face, and impact point. So how do we create speed, and how do we deliver the club with the right speed, path, face, and impact point? That's really what the game is, from putt to drive. And adjusting one of these systems without consideration to the other is inefficient. So if we increase someone's speed but mess up their geometric impact alignments, then we've got problems. And if we get good impact alignments without the right amount of speed, we're in trouble there too. So it's really a combination of both. So with that, we could go in a million directions. We could go into TrackMan, we can go into gears, but the new thing on the horizon is we call dual force plates. These are the Smart to Move Kistler force plates that are 2 separate force plates. These are about 2.5 years old. I never bought any other system before that because I knew these existed 25 years ago when I went to Health South and saw Hank Johnson with people on force plates back then. And I knew I wanted to have these, and I didn't want to learn about ground reaction forces until I felt like I had the right equipment. So when I bought these, I literally didn't know how to turn them on. So I turned them on and I started measuring good players, bad players, looking at the graphs, learning on my own. I had no one really to call. All the other pieces of equipment that were out there were single plate systems with pressure mats sitting on top of them, which are really, really good, by the way. But I just felt like it didn't give me what each individual foot contribution was doing. You could tell me what one plate's doing net because of the 2 feet doesn't mean the same to me as what the right foot's doing or the left foot's doing or the lead of the trail foot. So that's why I waited. And so I had to really learn from really the ground, as we say, the ground up.
I just want to say, James, before you go along, anyone who's watching, if you do have questions, please submit them on the form on the right. And then if you're watching either on a desktop or on your phone, you can slide the gray bar to enlarge the screen where James is presenting, so you can see some of the detail of what he's going to do with the force plates.
Thank you, Matt. I call it completing the circuit. You know, we're very inquisitive people in this instruction business. And this is a slide I've had for years, and I never had the ground part. You know, I didn't really have the shoe part, but I had the ground part. But we had 3D for the body, you know, all kinds of stuff with the mind, how we grip the club, the grip itself, the shaft, the ball, the club head. We've got information now on all of that, as I call completing the circuit from the ground through the club, through the golfer, and, you know, the ground, the ball, the golfer, and the ground again. So this is all part of that. You know, in 1992, believe it or not, I bought what they called in-sync force plates. These were two plates that you would put under your feet and the golfer would hit. And then there was a little LED screen that showed whether it went heel, toe, and trail and lead foot as far as total weight. And you couldn't play it back and stop it frame by frame, so I would actually video the feet with the little LED screen live, and then I would play it back frame by frame with my Sony camera. I guess at the time I wasn't smart enough to understand what I was seeing, and I learned a little bit here and there, but it kind of piqued me saying, I know there's something better than that. And that's again, when I saw those plates in 1994, I knew there was something better. And in 2018, that's when I got the Kistler force plates. You also got the other ones, ATMI, all still very good. And I think Vertex plates. So there's three types of plates out there. Kistler has a fine reputation. The guys at S2M had created the software, which is what I was really looking for. And the gas people also had, I thought, a wonderful product. So in 06, that's when I got my, if any of y'all have ever seen the old AMM system, it's wires, it's 12 sensor system going into a computer that was measuring everything 3D you can imagine. It did not do a very good job on the club because it measured the club as a straight rod. It didn't tell about the dynamics going on with the club, the twisting and the droop and the lead deflection of the face. So it was limited there, but for the body, the wrist graphs, everything else was phenomenal. And then in 2014, I bought Gears because number one, Gears had the club data. As being a top 100 club fitter and someone really interested in shafts, I could tell how much the shaft was torquing, how much lead deflection, droop was going on, and it was also giving me club delivery data. So it was giving me path, face, angle of attack. It was giving me impact point. With Gears, I don't even have to spray the face. So it was really an incredible thing to purchase then. And I know that with that and TrackMan, it's given me almost everything I ever needed. But I still didn't have the ground plates until 2 years ago. So what do we measure with the Kistler 3D force plates, the S2M software, and Gears? Ground reaction forces is a tale of lateral, rotational, and vertical forces peaking, then reversing on the downswing that have an effect on the speed generation system and the impact alignment system. Now Matt, who's a publisher and an English major, would probably, that's the most run-on sentence ever, but it's all important to each other. So we have lateral forces going this way, rotational forces into the ground going this way and this way with our feet, the vertical forces, a de-weighting and a jump. All of those forces peak and reverse before impact. Peak and reverse before impact. Peak and reverse before impact. It's an amazing system, and what that does is that, you know, the club, when it comes down, by all of these forces reversing, all help uncock that golf club and pull the body of the golfer, as we call normal to the golf ball, and pull the club more normal, pull it away from the golf ball, which also helps throw it out. So if I was sitting right here and I had this club right here and you grab my shirt label and yank me to the ceiling really quick, this club would uncock. So that's part of the, so what we realized is that the people who swing the club faster, all of these forces are peaking in one direction and very quickly peaking in the other direction before impact. And that's all part of the speed generation system. So I've said for a long time, the golf swing is a controlled jackknife with geometric consequences. In other words, a jackknife has a blade and a holster, and then it's coming down and it's uncocking. And depending on whether you speed something up, slow something down, you start changing this impact at the bottom. So that's the geometric consequences. Where, you know, to understand ground forces, when I got my plates a couple of years ago, I didn't know anything. So I had to learn everything from scratch. I had never gone to any certifications, really looked at any stuff online. Believe it or not, I never read. So anyway, I had to start from ground zero. And when I was putting these presentations in the last year or so on ground reaction forces, I said, what definitions, if I didn't know anything about ground reaction forces, especially dual force plate ground reaction forces, what would I want to know? What would I have wanted to know from the very beginning? So we're going to go through some definitions here, and I'll go through some explanations. So they're very simple. These are shapes that are on the screen, but you can almost think of these shapes as a human being in a different direction. In other words, this circle might be looking from the sky, looking at the golfer, or it might be the golfer from the frontal view, you know, looking at that. So when these shapes really represent us as a golfer. So the ground reaction force magnitude is equal to the weight of the object when still. So if you've got an object like a human body, if it's still, if I weigh 270 pounds, so right now I'm not moving, so I'm pushing into the ground 270 pounds, and since the ground is firm, it's pushing up 270 pounds. So that's what really this slide means when it's not moving. Once we start moving, different set of rules. Each foot creates its own force vector. So you look here at this particular graphic, each foot is pushing down with the yellow arrows, and the red arrow on each foot is the ground reaction force pushing in the exact opposite direction. The combined force vector is created by combining these two on each foot, and it actually summarizes where they are right and left, and it's kind of the midpoint between the two in both direction and in magnitude. So in other words, if you add the two small red arrows, it equals the big red arrow. And since the weight is balanced, that arrow is in the middle of the two small arrows. So that's kind of the things that we have to understand about combined force vectors, because it's the combined, its direction in relation to the center of mass is what starts to introduce potential torques in rotation. This combined force vector's origination, magnitude, and direction in relationship to the center of mass depends whether translation, which is just a straight line motion, or rotational torques are created. So for instance, in this particular view, if that person was squatting and jumping equally with each foot, he would only translate. In other words, that center of mass right above his belly button would just move straight up vertically because he's getting equal amounts on either side of the center of mass. When there's an imbalance, that's what starts creating torques. Every object or body has a center of mass. So again, you can almost think of this as your pelvis looking from the sky, and there's the center of your pelvis. A force through the center of mass will translate it. So this force pushing right through here just moves it in a linear force, the direction. It doesn't rotate it at all. So for instance, you can almost think of this as a golf ball hitting the face of the club. If the ball hits right in front of the center of mass, the club doesn't twist at all. It only slows the club head down. Well, in golf, for instance, if that's the pelvis from the frontal view, if you push right through it, that person's going into vertical direction with their center of mass. They're almost like early extension. So there, if it pushes it, it just translates it. So translating moves in a straight line. A force to either side of the center of mass will create a torque. It'll rotate the object around its center of mass and slightly translate it. So when I apply this force away from the center of mass, it not only twists the object, but it does a slight translation. So in other words, it's a slight linear movement along with its rotational movement. If I increase this force in the same spot, the greater the force of the object will rotate around its center faster. So again, smaller force, same place, greater force, more rotation. And if I take that same force from here and move it here, the further it moves away from the center of mass, the faster the object will rotate around its center of mass and do, again, some slight translation. So I've got some visuals here. A moment arm is the distance from the center of the mass perpendicular to the force direction. So if here's the force is in this direction, right through that dotted line, the moment arm is the distance from the center of this mass to that force perpendicular. So there's perpendicular to the force. That distance is the moment arm. So here on the right, we have a wrench. So if that wrench, there's the nut that we're trying to loosen, and if the hand is pulling up and the center of all of that pressure is right there, moving in that direction, the moment arm is the distance between here and here. Anybody who's done a lot of work with a wrench knows that if you're really having trouble getting something to loosen, the further towards the end of the wrench you grab it. And if you can't unloosen it, then you go get a pipe and you put a pipe around the wrench and you make a longer moment arm, and then you can break the nut. So that's very important because, like, for instance, when we're talking about how we rotate the golf swing in the horizontal plane, this anterior posterior force, the further we move those away from the center of mass with the same amount of force, the more we're going to rotate. The longer the moment arm distance is away from the center of mass, the same amount of force, the faster it will rotate. So again, a longer moment arm with that smaller force, this will rotate faster. So here we have a situation where we have forces from both sides of the center of mass. So you say, well, where would this apply in golf? Well, when we're trying to rotate our feet from looking from the sky straight down, our feet move in this direction in the golf swing to create rotation, okay? So if you have two forces moving on the opposite side of the center of mass, that's where the combined force really doesn't mean anything because they're on both sides. So an example of that would be here when we're trying to take a wrench off of, take a tire off. If it's really hard to turn, you get one of these X wrenches and you can push down on one side and pull up on the other side, and that creates a torque around that nut, and it's much easier to take off. If you ever notice when you have a one-sided wrench to take a tire off, sometimes it's very difficult because you don't have enough torque power to loosen that bolt, especially if it was done at a shop. Those guys tighten it up pretty heavy. So in the golf swing, that looks like this from the sky. So here's the center of mass, and this is the ground reaction force. That's not the direction the feet are moving, but this is the direction of the ground reaction force, which is directly opposite of the way the feet are moving. So this is the beginning of the downswing for this golfer, and his trail foot is pushing away from the target, a la Greg Norman, and his lead foot is pushing towards the target line, and that creates that negative that torque going this way, and that's what rotates the body. So if we move these further away from the center of mass, we get more rotation. So if you get a person with a really, really narrow stance and they can't create any kind of rotation, sometimes you widen the stance and you see some magic. Now, when I go from this point on, I'm going to be using some of this terminology. There again, 2 years ago, I had no idea what any of this was. So, but now it's very important to me. So you have three planes of motion in really anything, not just golf. The frontal plane is kind of the front view of a camera. So imagine a plane of glass going right through my body, right through the middle, perpendicular to the camera that you see me in. That's the frontal plane. The sagittal plane is a plane going right through the middle of my body this way. And then the transverse or horizontal plane is a plane going right through my body this way, horizontal to the ground. And then we also use what's called Z-axis torque. So remember, you've got the X and the Y axis, but you have the Z-axis going up through the body, and the torque is the torque around the Z-axis. So if I say Z-axis torque, it means the same as transverse or horizontal torque. Again, there's three different kind of things that mean the same exact thing. So it's important when we start looking at this, when we have forces created, when it's away from the center of mass, how it starts creating torques. So why would we even want to know this? If you increase or decrease these torques, you start, one, potentially changing the speed of the golfer, and two, you start changing how the club hits the golf ball. That's why this is so important. Now, here's the torques around these three planes, breaking them apart from each other. Again, the transverse is the plane around my center of mass when I'm motionless. And you can see that vertical line with that torque around it. That vertical line is the Z-axis. So that's the transverse or horizontal torque. So there's the perfect incident there, is that at the start of the downswing, the trail foot moving back away from the target line, the lead foot pushing towards, creates the ground reaction force that you see on the screen, which creates that torque. From the frontal view, this is not the world's best picture of it, but from the frontal view, where again the plane goes right through the middle of the body this way, this is more like somewhat the downswing or closer to max verticals. So in the verticals, if the trail foot's pushing away from the target, which creates a ground reaction force towards the target, and the lead foot is pushing into the ground, which creates a force going vertically up, that combined will be to the side of the center of mass, which will create the frontal torque. So for instance, a perfect example, if I flex my knees and I only push into the ground with my lead foot, it torques my body this way, like doing a cartwheel. That's how people do cartwheels. They're actually creating a torque because there's the center of mass, creating this force that creates the torque. So if you have a person backing up too much on the ball, can't get to the ball with an iron, has trouble with not getting in front of the ball, the ground in front of the ball, chances are they might have too much of this lead force on the downswing. I'll both increase that and decrease that in golfers. It depends what's best for you as the teacher and the student. So this is more of the same descriptions when you're looking at a golfer. And these are at different positions. So these particular vectors I put up there are from the Kistler plates powered by Smart to Move. So what you see at max lateral force, so the max lateral force in the golf swing, starting the downswing, is when you have the most force pushing the body this way. And his particular swing, that max lateral, his trail foot is pushing away from the target, which creates a ground reaction force both up and towards the target. But his lead foot, look at that blue arrow. That lead foot, he's pushing into the ground, which is creating the vertical portion of that arrow, but also the arrow's pointing towards the target. So the only way that arrow can point towards the target is if he's pulling with his left foot, pulling him forward. His lead foot pulling him forward. Not everybody produces that blue arrow. Some people only produce vertical at maximum lateral, and that's more of this way. He's actually, his lateral is helped by his lead foot pulling and his trail foot pushing this way. And that creates a combined arrow that's well away from the center of mass. So that's when we have the most lateral force. Now we all know that the force precedes the motion. So sometimes you'll see these forces max out and you don't yet see them move or translate because the forces happen before the motion in a lot of instances. This is the same max lateral force from the sagittal plane, which for us, we call it down the line. So again, that plane cuts right through that golfer this way, and you're only viewing it from here. And that torque, you can see the trail foot is pushing back and down, and the lead foot is pushing also back, forward and down, which creates a combined, which is that gold arrow, which is in the front side of the center of mass. So I'm not saying he's going to do a backflip, but I'm telling you that definitely that's helping him go this way. Now, a lot of early extension isn't just from the ground reaction forces. The golfer actually trying to or using this motion is the predominant thing that causes early extension. This is the max lateral force from the z-axis, the horizontal plane torque. In other words, looking down from the sky. This is about, maximum lateral is about at the top of the swing for most good golfers. And so at that moment, now you can see from looking down the direction, his trail foot's pushing away from the target and behind it, and the lead foot is actually pulling him towards the target and pushing down into the ground. That creates a combine, which is the orange arrow just in front of his center of mass. So that's creating that torque. That is from lateral force. Now we're talking about the rotation in the golf swing, how we rotate in the golf swing. So again, we all know as instructors, sometimes we're trying to increase someone's rotation. Sometimes we're trying to slow their rotation down. So you can use these forces to your advantage depending on what you're trying to do. You know how when you have real young kids that just have way too much rotation and the arms hang way behind, sometimes we can turn off some of these forces that helps the golfer get more in sync with their arms. So this is the z-axis horizontal torque from the frontal plane. So you don't see much of how it works here. You say, well, that really looks like a frontal plane vertical, which it mostly is, because there's not really, you can't really tell the horizontal torque from this view. From the back view, you could, or the sagittal plane view, we could see the same thing, trail foot moving down and back, lead foot pushing down and forward, and that changes that orange arrow, that combined arrow just behind the center of mass. And that's, again, when we create the maximum horizontal torque. Now, to give you an idea where that is, most players, their maximum rotational force is when the lead arm is about parallel to the ground coming down. That's how early this is. So that's pretty much where this golfer is. And this is the max torque, z-axis horizontal torque in the transverse. Now, this is the one that explains the rotation in the golf swing the best. There again, you can see those two force vectors are totally almost perpendicular to the line between the two forces. And you see that they're working in opposite directions, just like the wrench was working in the opposite directions. That's what gets the golfer really rotating. But the amazing part, again, that's almost that left arm parallel. The amazing thing is by the time the golfer gets to impact, these arrows are reversed. They're reversed. So it's one of the things that helps slow down the rotation of the golfer. It's not the predominant thing that slows down the rotation, but the ground is used to kind of help break the rotation of the body to slow it down. Now we're getting to the verticals. At maximum vertical is also, most players, good players, are somewhere between lead arm parallel and club almost parallel to the ground. Somewhere up between here and here is when verticals max out, the total verticals. And you can see with this golfer, the predominant amount of vertical force is created by the lead side. The trail side still is, it has some vertical, but usually the lead side is the boss here. And you can see the combined force vector is right through the middle, or just to the right of the center of mass. So think about this. If that person's combined force vector was more away from the center of mass, he would kick back even further. So we know with a driver, we might want that, but with an iron, we don't want too much of it, especially if the golfer doesn't have lag. If a golfer doesn't have lag, a whole bunch of frontal plane torque kicking the head back is not a good thing. Is not a good thing. And this is the vertical force from the sagittal plane view. And there again, you can see now that arrows is as much, this rear arrow is as much forward leaning as it's going to be, and the trail is, and then the blue one, which is the lead, is as much pushing back as it is, and that's why this combined is way back here, because it's predominantly produced by this blue arrow. Again, we're combining those two arrows, almost melting them into something that's resultant of those two forces. And then here we go, maximum vertical force. These arrows here are not as big as they were when we were creating our maximum horizontal torque. Okay, so again, maximum horizontal plane torque, that's what it looks like at vertical force, max vertical. So you see these kind of get turned off a little bit, and it's not as much rotational, because by the time you get the impact, again, these are reversed for most players. Some players don't. As a matter of fact, some of our poorer players with no club head speed, this lead foot, which is pushing forward early in the downswing, pushing forward, that's when you see that little disc coming down for good players. That left foot's going back. It actually reverses this torque, reverses it. Not everybody has that. The poor players with no club head speed has no reversing torque. Now, which one of these three bodies will fall and why? So if you look at all three, we've got the center of mass marked on all three of these positions or poses. The one on the left, the feet are together, but the force vectors created by each foot, the combined force vector goes right through the center of mass. The second one is on one foot, but the center of mass is slightly offset from the red line, which is the, since it's not a combined, it's only one force vector. It's not in line with the center of mass. Then the third pose, you see the feet pushed out and pushing down and away, and the ground reaction force is going the other direction, but the combined is a vertical line going right through the center of mass. So the one in the middle is the one that's going to fall. Which way they're going to fall? If this person's facing the camera, they're going to fall to her right, because it's not through the center of mass. Now, this is really important, because one of the things I talk about is the fall in the downswing of the lead leg de-weighting. The body starts falling this way, and the pressure in the vertical force goes to the right. So the pressure going to the right with the combined vector is not moving to the right because the body's moving to the right. The force vector is moving to the right, the trail foot, because the lead foot is de-weighting. Very important thing, something I never really truly understood until I got these plates. So the ground reaction forces start before the club starts back. So I look at what the club and the feet are doing before the club moves, and I'm telling you, there's a cadence there. If a person's dead static when the club moves back, they're in trouble. The total lateral force starts going toward the target before halfway in the backswing. Halfway back. So for instance, when the club first starts back, the trail foot is pushing away from the target. The lead foot is pushing towards the target. And what it is the lead foot, believe it or not, is pushing more toward the target than the trail's pushing away. So the lead wins. So what's pushing us or getting us maybe even a tad to the right from the backswing is the lead foot pushing away. But that total force of pushing away from the target changes direction by the time the club gets right here for most good golfers. And already the force is, the net force is already starting to push the body or wanting to push the body target. Very, very early. Not common among bad players. Most bad players are very late getting laterally to the left. Okay? And that's very important, because if they don't get to the left early enough, they can't use the vertical force on their lead side because they're still trapped over here on the right side. Again, very important when the ball's sitting on the ground, especially. Peak lateral. So again, these are the lateral forces. The peak lateral is usually close to the top of the swing for most good players, is when that lateral force, I didn't say motion, lateral force is peak, because you don't usually see some of that lateral force until after, or excuse me, lateral motion until the force has already taken place. 71% are pre-top for drivers with tour players that I've got measured. So when that club is getting to the top, that maximum lateral is already started. And only 42% pre-top with a 7-iron. So there's not as much speed there to go left. I think part of that's a little bit of the hit syndrome, just trying to swing it harder. Then we have, again, if the peak lateral is at the top, pushing us this way, before impact, the laterals reverse. So it's pushing you towards, and before the club gets to the ball, it's pushing you away. So these laterals go from max positive to almost max negative between the top and impact. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing that it happens in that short period of time, because the downswing is only a quarter of a second long. The z-axis, so this is the z-axis, and here's the torque. So in other words, when the club goes back, when the anterior posterior feet kick in to create rotation, that maximum, or excuse me, that maximum rotational force happens usually for good players before the club, or by the time the club gets to parallel of the ground. That's when they're really digging into the ground, pushing this back, pushing this forward. That gives them the most rotation, and that is early. It's one of the reasons that average golfers are way too underturned, is because this peak rotation torque is way later for them, way later, too late, which is why they're so closed at impact and they throw the club away. Let's talk a little bit about D-weight. So for instance, if I'm standing here and you say jump, I can't jump unless I flex my legs and straighten. So if I weigh, again, 270 right now, if I flex my knees and straighten them, as I'm flexing my knees, I'm not weighing 270 in the ground anymore. There's what's called a D weight. If you look at this particular graph, this is the Kistler S2M graphs. This is take back or address. This is the top of the backswing. This is impact, and that's finish. So the total weight, which is this brown line, the way you get the total weight, you add the trail foot in red, the lead foot in blue. So if you add the blue and the red equals the brown. So here at the beginning of the backswing, there's a little bump where you get a little bit more vertical force into the ground. And then there's a D weight going into the top of the swing, and then here come the verticals. This peak D weight is 80 to 85% on iron. So if a person weighs 200 pounds, 80% at this maximum D weight right here, they weigh 160. Okay, that's for irons. For woods, it's about 70%. So if they're 200 pounds at this maximum D weight, they're 140. And this D weight, this little curl in this line, should happen pretty close to the top of the swing. Top of the swing for me is when the club changes direction. Some people use when the hands change direction or maximum hand height. I believe all of them are correct in certain ways, but that's how I determine the backswing and the downswing starting there. And on drivers, it's down to 70%. So that golfer vertically into the ground at the top of the swing is only weighing 70% of their body mass. And then here comes the jump. So, and you can see the jump is predominantly in the blue line, which is the lead leg. And then the trail leg is at maximum kind of D weight here as this increases. And then you see where this kind of re-engages the trail leg. And in the old body track, that's when you would see that center of pressure kind of rock back towards the right foot a little bit. That's the frontal torque. Again, when you do this, When you push this into the ground vertically, it pushes your weight back into your right foot. So that's the right foot kind of accepting that lead foot vertical that's creating that torque, is throwing it back in the right foot. They're not going from here backwards. They're just torquing themselves around their body. So again, I have a greater appreciation for that when I got to do a force plates. 90% peak vertical, 90% of the people on tour that I've got are pre-shaft parallel in the downswing is when their verticals max out. If you're late on the D weight, you're going to be late on the verticals. Very, very important. So most poor players are late D weighting. So I try to get my players to feel like on the backswing is when they're maybe falling a little left, later in the backswing, and D-weighting, and then here comes the jump with the lead leg. So that creates a much cleaner lead leg. The lead leg has so much responsibility in the golf swing. But again, that's how early the lead vertical is on the downswing. And I'm here to tell you, most poor players, it's after that, if not even after impact in some cases. Okay, I got a couple of case studies here, real quick, of some things we did with average golfers with these force plates. Here's a young lady, her first golf lesson ever. So on the S2M software, we have video that times the swing, the video with this graph. So whenever the video starts playing, the graph moves from left to right across the screen. So again, the first vertical line is a take back, the second vertical line is top, the third one is impact, and the fourth one is finish. And again, the red line is the trail foot, the blue line is the lead foot, and the combined is the brown line. So you can see she's increasing her total body mass at the top. And what did I just say the last screen? We want to be de-weighting at that time. She didn't de-weight until after the top of the swing. So she got to the top, and on the way down, she was de-weighting. Well, if she's going to do that, it's not going to be much vertical, and it's going to be late. So, and not only that, she was jumping with both feet. It wasn't predominantly with the lead. If you notice here, the lead leg from the top is still de-weighting, and then here comes a small lead leg vertical, which is not good, and the trail leg is almost even with that. So she's basically jumping with both feet straight up, and we all know the problems that can cause. So then the next screen is literally after 5 swings later. What we did, we didn't totally clean it up because you could see her de-weighting is still a little late here. I'd like it a little earlier, but her left leg, her lead leg, sure is a lot more predominant. So you can see that lead foot pushing into the ground vertically, and it peaks at a much higher place. And a matter of fact, right here it is, I don't think I have her, it's at about 120% of her body mass on her lead leg alone. Her original swing, she was under 100 with her lead leg vertical. So a huge difference in her lead leg vertical, and you can see the trail leg at least starting to trail off a little bit better, and it's definitely not equal to the lead. So she had 61 miles an hour before. We literally got her 10 miles an hour in about 5 minutes. Now, not everybody that comes in this room gets that, but this was an easy one for her.
Sets up a really good question that came from one of the crowd. When you're doing this over the course of 5 swings, like you just described, how much of the talk with the player is very specific science related, and how much of it is that's your operating system that's what you're thinking about behind the scenes, and you're telling the player something a lot more general or arty or holistic or however you want to call it?
Great question. Number one, they're not going to see these graphs unless I think I need to convince them. Those graphs are for me. So all I did with her is get her set up with maybe 60-40 lead and taught her how to de-weight her lead leg and how to push out of it. That's all I did. I just taught her, I said, look, stay over the top. This is an iron now. Stay over the top of the ball, flex the lead leg a little bit. It's almost like the arm goes down like this and the downswing push out of it. It's almost like this motion. That's the feeling that she got. And look, towards the end of the lesson, she was jumping off. I mean, she was literally jumping off the ground. So she went from totally flat-footed and dead to being able to, you know, I don't want people to jump off the ground too much. I know some people do it very well, world-class players that do, but average players, I want them to see them use their verticals more and in the right place. But again, if you remember earlier, we talked about the speed generation system and the impact alignment system. We have to determine with that golfer, when we change those verticals and increase speed, what does that do to how they deliver the club? Because it could be one helping one way and hurting another. In other words, she might start hitting the ball fat if she gets too much lead leg verticals. This next one is a case study of improving someone's chipping motion. This guy come to me with the yips. So he had a chip shot swing that looked like this. So he'd come in and he would really fold his arms up through the ball. The reason is his head and everything was still dipping. So I knew his verticals were not going to be what they needed to be. Even in a chipping motion, you want a little push into the ground coming into the ball. In other words, lead leg pushing into the ground, especially 30, 40-yard pitch. This is a 20-yard pitch, and he had kind of a little saggy thing going. We've all seen it. And then when you got the saggy thing going with the knees, you're going to have to fold the arms up, and then you start adding with the hands and everything happens. So let's look at the verticals again, which is the bottom graph. And you can see his 100%, 100%, 100% to the top, a small D weight, but he never has any verticals at impact, ever. Never pushes out of it. And then you can also see the trail side is above the lead side. So he has more pressure into the ground, force into the ground with his trail than his lead. So he's trail biased and never uses his lead leg. And so he doesn't peak until later. That's the old genuflect push kind of thing. And it really makes finding the bottom of the swing very difficult. So this is all we did. This didn't take very long either. I don't teach people to stay way left, way forward, but we got them a little more forward and taught them how to flex the leg and just kind of push out of it. And so now you see a totally different graph on the vertical side. 100%, 100%, a little D weight, and then now you see the verticals peak out right at about impact, which for a chip or a pitch, I kind of like. For a full swing, that's late, but for a chip or a pitch, I'm in. So, and predominantly, where's that push coming from? It's not coming from his trail side, it's coming from his lead side. So all of a sudden, he started to cleanly find the golf ball, and the bottom of the ground got to be less of a variable for him. Instead of the dive swing, chip shot, he become this way. Most golfers, when you tell them it's okay to feel like you're moving away from the golfer, think you got three eyes. But they're pushing away. The good players are pushing away from the ball when they're hitting it. Okay. Last one, kind of a changed study of how do we change someone's path with force plates. Here's a person with a 4.5 -4 angle of attack, 4.5 angle of attack with a 7-iron with a 6.3 path to the right. So it's more to the right than I would like, okay? So had trouble hitting the ball fat, had trouble even a potential shank from time to time because the housel's moving out towards the ball. So what I noticed quickly, if we look at the third graph, again, address, top, impact, finish. At the top, that Z torque that I was talking about, that horizontal plane torque, that Z axis torque, was very low at the transition. So at transition, there were about 20 Newton meters per kilogram. So in other words, that's the trail foot pushing this way, the lead foot pushing this way, a very small torque factor at the change of direction of the club. A tour player will be about 60 Newton meters per kilogram at that same point. When that club changes direction, they're already be using much more torque at that moment in time, much more, 60. And with a driver, the average I have is 72 Newton meters per kilogram. So when those people get the driver, when that club changes direction, they're just destroying the ground in that direction. That's how they get their pelvis open so early. You know, most players, average players' pelvises are horribly underturned. And what's interesting is this particular golfer, the total vertical torque was actually pretty good, but it was too late. So the vertical torque here really got high. The total was a really nice number, but it was too late. Now so again, that was a 6.3 path. And this is at max vertical torque. So the reason I got this one up, so at max vertical torque, you can see where the lead arm is just past parallel coming down. That's when this person originally had the most torque created by this anterior posterior motion of the feet. Now watch what happened. So remember where this lead arm is. See how light that is? Now the path is 1.9, now is at the top. And you can see now at the change of direction, that torque is at doubled. It's at 40 Newton meters per kilogram. So a huge difference in that torque into the ground to start the downswing. And then what you're going to see in the next slide is at max vertical torque. Look how much earlier the left arm is before parallel. So that opened the golfer quicker, which did change geographically where this club came down. So again, depending on the player, if you've got a player who's over the top, the last thing you want to do is increase this torque. You might decrease it. So you have to use it to your own geometric advantage as the golf pro and teacher. Oh, I do have one of them, angle of attack. Here's a person, 109 miles an hour. This is a mini tour player I teach. He's hitting up on it 5.8 degrees, hitting the ball a blow in the face. I'm not crazy about somebody hitting up on it 5.8. I know some people do it successfully. I just haven't seen many. I know Bryson does it, but he's not normal. So what we noticed here, tremendous verticals, and with the lead side. So the lead side vertical is so high that it's torquing his body, pushing his head back behind the ball, which makes the club bottom out before the ball, and he hits the ball in the bottom of the face. So what we did, we actually slowed down that vertical, that peak vertical. We reduced it slightly, didn't change his club head speed any, and now he hit the ball in the middle of the face with only a 1.2 angle of attack up versus 5 point something. So this is where you can change these torques. Not everybody does it exactly the same. So you can't say you have to do this or have to do that. I think when people get these force plates, they're going to say, what do I need to add and subtract to geometrically change this golfer's speed or to change this golfer's club delivery? So that's how I use it. That's how I use TrackMan. That's how I use gears. That's how I use anything. How is it going to help me with their speed, and how is it going to help me how they deliver the club? I want to really thank, obviously, Matt. Thank you so much for everything. You know, James at Leitz University, and obviously David himself for the opportunity to do this. This is a joy and a privilege to be able to do this. And if there are any questions, Matt, I'll be glad to field.
Yeah, I've got a couple. One is about the whole concept of capturing data on your players. I mean, there's the data obviously that we've been talking about in this presentation, which is the data you're measuring in that room. But what kind of data do you use to capture, for example, on your mini tour player, on one of your other aspiring tour players when they're out playing in the field or playing in a tournament? I mean, do you use some kind of version of strokes gained? How do you measure somebody's performance?
Well, you know, we all know now that golf more than striking a golf ball. You know, ball striking, full swing ball striking is my passion, but I understand as a former college player, want to be professional golfer was never going to happen. That golf's a lot more than striking a golf ball. So there's a myriad of things you have to really kind of pay attention to. I mean, right down to someone's diet and so forth and so on. There's a mental side, but I keep statistics, for instance, with my junior golfers in my junior development program. I have a statistical scorecard that I use that has all the basic stuff, but some pretty good stuff in there too. At the end of the round, it's about 12 lines of data they put in, and they put in their putts per hole, blah, 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 how long their last putt was, whether they missed the ball right of the green, left of the green, how long their approaches were, up and down percentage from inside of 75 yards, you know, all kinds of stuff. All they got to do is put down what they did and how many successful attempts for up and downs. And then from there, we put it in a master. This is all in a spreadsheet that goes back and populates the master one at the top that takes all the rounds. And then we come up with an idea of what they're doing on the golf course. Because I think it's huge. When they perform, it's when it's the most important. Absolutely. And you know, us teachers don't get a chance to watch our players play that much. They come in here and hit golf shots, and the guy goes, well, I've been hitting left all week, and he hit 5 balls to the right out of 10 and none left. So you got to be careful as a teacher. You got to ask those questions to see what's happening under the gun, and then observe them on the golf course, whether it's in a tournament or not.
One of the fun back and forth questions I think we would be arguing about face to face over a beer if we were actually allowed to travel these days would be if you think it's easier now to be an effective coach at a high level, or is it harder now? Obviously, we have a lot more data, we have a lot more ways to measure things, but with the avalanche of data out there, does that make a coach's job harder to kind of discern and discriminate what's good and bad data, quote unquote, or is there just so much opportunity now to be able to figure out better ways forward?
Well, I think I'm a much more effective teacher now than I was even 2 years ago. And, you know, I'm going, Matt, we've talked about it. I wanted to write a book for 25, 30 years, and I've got all this information, but it keeps changing. Mm-hmm. And not totally. I still have some of my core beliefs from 30 years ago that I still stand on today. But I think it's easier on the diagnosis end from our part. Now, when you get into a really elite player, you just got to be really careful, because you got a better chance of screwing them up than helping them, especially if they can't stay, you know, if they can't understand data, or they get confused by it, or if they don't get immediate results, they lose confidence and then they go compete with that. It's a recipe for disaster. You know, there are many reasons I don't teach tour players. I should say that I teach some mini tour players, but I've stayed on the tour. Number one, I'm still a head golf professional. I mean, at a golf tournament with 120 golfers. So I can't travel and keep my job. But the other reason is, if I'm on that tee or on the golf course with this professional golfer, and I've got to make determinations with just my naked eye, without my equipment, that's a dangerous thing. And I think that it's very difficult to do that. Where I like this controlled environment, we get indoor to outdoor, so it is somewhat real because we have a live target. But I think it's easier. You just got to be careful that you don't confuse the golfer with the technology.
Right. That's a good segue into the next question, which is, let's say you have a good club player, you know, somebody who played or was in the semifinals of the club championship last year, someone who might have their own data solution, they might have a TrackMan, you know, they're conversant in a lot of the things that we've been talking about over the last hour here. What do you do when a player like that comes to you and is neck deep in the data, too much so, and they're having trouble taking a step back and making golf swings because they're so immersed in the data? What are some of your strategies for helping them take that step back?
Again, another good question, but it also has regional bias. Matt, you're from the Northeast, and you know the people in the Northeast take more lessons than anybody. They are very, very understanding of data. They're A-types, and they, you know, when I go and teach in the Hamptons, I teach at Rick Hartman's place in Atlantic a week a year, and it's a fun place to go. I kind of like it because it's a challenge. It's like a fist fight with all those New York A-types. And because I will own them at the end of the lesson, because you just got to take control as an instructor and not let the player drift. I tell my students at that level, assume you do everything perfect except what we're talking about. That's my statement. That helps me a lot. I said, okay, I have to worry about this. Nope, 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 nope. Only worry about what we're talking about. Assume you do everything else perfect. And that's helped me a lot through the years.
Well, that about sums it up. And it's always great to spend time with you, even if it's virtually like this. If somebody wants to find you out in the world, how do they do it? Does you have a website? How do people track you down if they want to learn more?
Well, I've got a website, lightsgolf.com, which I don't do much with, but I have a little bit, there's some information in there. I'm at Chifuncta Country Club, the beautiful Chifuncta Country Club with a wonderful learning center here. If you remember earlier in the presentation, I mean, it's a great place. I love doing instructor training. We do full day sessions, multiple instructors. They come from all over the world. It's my favorite thing to do. Then obviously lessons with my students. You can reach me at Chifuncta Country Club. It's area code 985-892-1949. And again, my website, lightsgolf.com. And that's the best way. And again, what a privilege to do this. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David. It's been a wonderful time.
Excellent. Hope to see you soon, sir.
All right, thank you.